Mr. Ferguson, what is the idea of this tour of the milk zone?
Well, to provide the producers' representative, Mr. Murray, and myself an opportunity of reporting to the industry what might be described as current affairs.
And you mentioned to me earlier that there could be a crisis developing in the industry.
Yes, I would say, without any semblance of ambiguity, that we're on the verge of an impending crisis.
And what is this crisis?
Well, this is due to the bewilderment and confusion, and I might say apprehension, caused as a result of excluding A, the Milk Board, B, the Milk Zone Dairymen's Union, as members of an advisory council appointed for the purpose of examining dairy industry affairs with particular reference to liquid milk marketing.
And what line will this report take, or this inquiry take?
Well, the line is intended to examine mainly the report of the previous Minister for Agriculture, Mr. Chaffee, wherein it's recommended that a single authority be brought into being to control dairy industry affairs within New South Wales.
Will this have any effect on the milk zone dairymen?
In my belief, it can't avoid but having effect on the milk zone dairymen. It's claimed that it will have no effect. Well, if that is so, then obviously there's no justification for any form of inquiry or attention to this matter. It's not a question of whether it will have an effect. It may well have an effect, and therefore the milk zone dairyman is, as I said, somewhat bewildered and certainly very, very apprehensive.
Mr. Ferguson, what do you think about the federal government scheme to rehabilitate the dairy industry?
Well, personally, I support very strongly the scheme, which I believe to be a part answer to the problem of low-income farms, especially in Queensland and the northern part of New South Wales, where, to our own knowledge, the main problem is due to A, small farms, 2, low income, 3, lack of efficient marketing facilities. The federal government scheme is in accordance with the recommendation of an earlier dairy industry inquiry and what is described as the McCarthy report, tabled in Parliament in 1961, and the government's current intention is just one of the recommendations, and I myself believe to be a worthy recommendation. It's designed to rehabilitate low-income farms within the areas described.
And would you say that, or would you consider that the Hunter dairy farms, would they come into this category?
I don't think so.
They're operating quite profitably.
Well, I wouldn't say quite profitably. Broadly speaking, they're operating profitably. There are, of course, pockets, there are individuals. You will always have that. That we seek to overcome that difficulty by allowing the negotiability of quotas up to 5 cans or 50 gallons. And this, in turn, allows of a person to go out of production if he wishes, only if he wishes. He leaves with some equity, retains his farm and his right to farm, but not to dairy farm. And the person, of course, acquiring that quota is much better equipped to carry on economically. It's working out very well.
And what changes have you seen during your term of office?
Well, I've seen tremendous changes. For example, 17 years ago, the aggregate return to farmers within the milk zone was $14 million a year. Our latest figures, $47 million a year. The aggregate lift in incomes amounts to 250% in 15 years. There's greater production per cow, per man, per acre, and there has been introduced efficient and most up-to-date methods. For example, the end result of the product we're handling amounts to $80 million a year. Of that amount, the farmer receives $47 million, as against the $14 million he received years ago, or 17 years ago. The other very important part, and of course perhaps the most important part, is improved service to the community. We deliver 2 million bottles of milk a day, and this is regarded as the most efficient milk delivery service in the world. I'm not exaggerating when I say that, because you may know that in America, Europe, the household deliveries have been eliminated, that we're trying to improve, not eliminate. And the proof of that is borne out in the local factory's recent endeavour, introducing a pure pack container. This is another contribution to providing the community with improved service. Lots and lots and lots can be said under this heading, but I know time's against us.
And finally, Mr. Ferguson, what do you intend doing after May the 31st?
Well, look for a job.
Mr. Bean, why is it that the more crude oil we find in Australia, the higher gasoline prices seem to go?
Well, in fact, they haven't increased yet, and I think this is more a threat than a fact at this moment. And I think perhaps I ought to add that there's really no reason why petrol prices should go up at all as a result of indigenous crude being found in growing quantities, if only that indigenous crude can be priced and used in the right way.
There's a fairly heavy subsidy paid for the exploration of oil in Australia. This must surely add to the final price of the product.
This is because there is a very big incentive built into the price of crude, and also it's a higher value is attributed to it than would apply to imported crudes. The effect of this is to potentially build up the cost of the raw material which the oil industry uses, in fact crude oil, but as I said before, this is partly an artificial situation.
Well, BP, I gather, has been a little unlucky with its exploration in Australia. You've been at it for, what, 50 years or so and found, well, comparatively little.
Yes, this is unfortunately very true.
This means that from your other resources in the Middle East, you can, in fact, buy oil, or bring oil, much cheaper than you can buy it in Australia. Why don't you do it?
This is true, and indeed, in the past, this is precisely what we've done, and precisely what the entire refining industry in Australia has done. And it's only because of the high price that has been attributed to indigenous crude that this situation will change.
You have two refineries in Australia now, one in the west, Kwinana, and one at Western Port, presumably because of reasonably deep water. Have you considered a third?
Yes, we've always got such possibilities in mind, though the economic facts of life involved are always that it's much cheaper to expand an existing refinery and put in additional plant of one kind or another than it is to start again from scratch and build what is known in the industry as a grassroots refinery.
Well, there's been talk for years of a refinery in the Newcastle area. We haven't got one. Now that there's also talk of development of Port Stephens as a deep water port, has BP considered this as a refinery site?
We certainly did consider Newcastle as an alternative to Western Port near Melbourne when we decided eventually to go to Melbourne. And one of the most important factors that decided the Melbourne site was indeed the fact that there was deep water there already. Newcastle might have been chosen had the circumstances been different at the time, but as I said before, I think it's unlikely that we will go for a third refinery before we've substantially expanded our existing facilities.
Well, taking for granted the fact that you have the facilities you need now, all except cheap Australian crude, what do you suggest be done about it?
Would you repeat that question, please?
You have two refineries, you have all the crude you need from overseas, but you are in a position where you're forced to use Australian crude as well, and you can't get it at the right price to keep the price of products down here in Australia. What should the oil companies or the government or anybody else do about it to make Australian crude competitive?
I think the most important thing is that means should be found to permit indigenous crude to find its place into the market at a price comparable with imported crudes, having regard to its location and having regard to its quality, because in this way the industry in this country can continue to operate on a direct commercial basis and in the atmosphere of competition which it has always lived in the past.
Ways can be found. Have you any specific suggestions? Cutting subsidies or increasing subsidies elsewhere? Or?
Well, in my opinion, subsidies could be very substantially cut where large-scale production is involved. Indeed, I don't believe that they're necessary in anything like the level that exists in those circumstances. And to the extent that for policy or other reasons smaller scale production has to be maintained, or it's desirable to maintain it, I believe that these can be helped and subsidized in a much more direct way without burdening the price of petroleum products throughout the country.
Two final questions. Of what quality is the crude we're finding in Australia?
The crudes are what are known as light crudes. That means that they have a relatively low specific gravity. This means, too, that they have a fairly high gasoline content and a rather low fuel oil content.
That means we don't get much diesel or paving oils or heavy lubricating oils out.
Quite a lot of diesel will come out of it, but very little heavy fuel oil. And as you say, the feedstock for making bitumen or lubes is unlikely to be available.
And the final question, as far as BP is concerned, not having Australian supplies of its own, is it in a position to buy from other producers?
BP, the way the arrangements work out, is already forced to buy a proportion of indigenous oil from other producers, and looks like being forced to buy very much larger quantities into the future. I think perhaps that answers your question.
If this must happen, what happens to the price of gasoline?
The price of gasoline will go up if the price of the raw material is maintained at an unnecessarily high level.
To most of us, a piece of metal is a piece of metal. We probably recognise the difference between steel, copper and aluminium, but there it pretty well ends. But 300 specialists in metal have been gathering all week here at Newcastle University at the annual conference of the Australian Institute of Metals. For them, metal's a very serious and lifetime study. Now, what does such a brains trust mean to the general consumers, who are, after all, the people who, in the long run, buy metal in its hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of uses? Dr. Bob Baker is the research chief at the Welding Institute in Britain, which used to be called the British Welding Research Association. He's out here to tell us something about welding, or perhaps not. Did you, in fact, come here to tell us how to weld better?
Well, I think at a conference like this, you're dealing with an exchange of information between people who produce materials and people who have to fabricate them into large structures and to design them into large structures, and not only large structures but also very small ones, the saucepans in your kitchen and so on, also produced by welding. And in exchanging information, you want to know what the desirable properties of the materials are, which makes them safer and cheaper to weld, and this has two effects.
Well, does this in fact mean that thanks to the exchange of information which has taken place this week, welders at, for argument's sake, our state dockyard are likely to find themselves in the near future using better equipment or better techniques or perhaps better metal for welding?
Yes, I think a slow development takes place in that direction, and the steelmakers become more aware of what the desirable properties of materials are, which makes them suitable for welding more cheaply and more safely. In this way, you sell more steel, and therefore Newcastle benefits. Also, the structures produced by welding are produced more economically, and this leads to cheaper prices in the shops, or at the very least to an arrest in the rate of rise of prices. Just one small correction, I'm not chief of the Welding Institute, I'm head of the Metallurgical Research Department there.
One of the experts here for this conference is Dr. J.S. Blair, who's the Assistant Director of Research at Stewart's and Lloyd's huge parent plant at Corby in England. Doctor, you're a pipelining specialist. Have you been able to tell us in Australia how to build better and bigger pipelines faster and cheaper?
I should hate to think that I could tell the Australians anything very much. They know a great deal about this already. But I have tried to raise one or two points and exercise the sort of techniques, tell them the sort of things that we use in England, which may be some help. And it seems to me that they will have to make sure of the safety aspect of pipelines, particularly gas pipelines. And as yet, we don't know a great deal about this. We know a certain amount. We hope to know a bit more. This is
what's the problem? Is it the metal or is it the technique?
A little bit of both, but it's mostly the material, I would say, and the technique of making the pipes as well.
We can make the necessary metal here in Australia, can we?
Oh, yes. We have to know exactly what it is we want. And this is getting known, not only in Australia, but elsewhere. But, of course, the main object of this conference is not really to give instructions about how things are to be done, but to know a bit more, to get a little bit more knowledge. The whole trouble is we don't know enough about things anyway.
And you feel you'll go away knowing more than you did when you came?
I certainly will, and I hope some others will. But to me it's been a most useful conference, not only with the contacts that we made, not only the technical discussions we've had, but the contacts which we make, the people we can discuss things with later, the more or less permanent friendships indeed that we make at a conference of this sort.
One of the Australian representatives here is Mr. Jack Thompson. Mr. Thompson's Chief of Quality Control for BHP, and although he's now stationed in Melbourne, he's conversant with pretty well all Australia's steel-making plants. Mr. Thompson, as a result of a conference like this, will BHP turn out newer, different types of steel in the future, and perhaps a cheaper steel?
Well, we have a continuing and very big research program, and to have the views of leaders of the metallurgical profession from overseas is a very valuable thing in itself. We get their way of thoughts, their own state of development overseas, and we can get many ideas for future development. Yes, the answer to your question, I'd say very definitely yes.
Well, it's been already said that Australia can produce the steel. Are there any big handicaps? What about trained staff?
Well, this is probably one of our great problems in Australia. We are a big country, distances are far apart. This conference is an excellent opportunity for people to get together, for young students to meet leaders in their profession. Have the opportunity of talking to these people is something that encourages them. We're handicapped badly by the present shortage of metallurgists in this country. Tremendous mineral development, development in metals generally of any type. All calling for metallurgists, and we need metallurgists very badly if we are to progress as an industrial nation.
And a conference like this makes Australian metallurgists better?
Yes, it certainly gives an exchange of views, the opportunity to compare views of our customers and users of steel, for example, in my case, is invaluable, and we wouldn't miss these conferences. We look forward to their continuing development in the future.
Thank you very much. That's only 3 of the delegates here who have proven that a conference of, well, metal eggheads like this has something to offer to the Australian public in the way of better and cheaper metals. And that's only 3 out of 300 odd. Murray Masterton reporting for Focus from the Metal Institute's conference at Newcastle University.
This is an artist impression of the Liddell Power Station project, excluding the river pumping system. The project has a 2,000 megawatt output with 4 500 megawatt turbo alternator units. You see here the main power station, the coal handling plant, the main cooling water dam, the rail line diversion of the main Northern Line, the New England Highway diversion. The water from the cooling water system, pumping system, comes in at this point, and it is held behind this main cooling water dam wall. The cooling water dam is an earth and rock filled structure, and it has a 4,200 foot long crest, 140 foot high at the centre, and the quantity of fill is about 4.5 million cubic yards. Here we have the turbine house housing the four 500 megawatt turbo alternators, and here we have the two reinforced concrete chimney stacks for the exhaust gases from the four boilers. Looking down below to an actual construction photo, which I might add is in the opposite hand, we have the turbine house, which is shown here half completed approximately. The total length of the turbine house will be eventually 1,000 feet. We'll come to somewhere down here. The height at this point is 90 feet and the width is 122 feet. And immediately behind the boiler will be the concrete stacks, one there and eventually one here. The stacks are 550 feet high. They're outside diameter at the base of 70 feet and the outside diameter at the top of 30 feet. Again, this is an artist's impression of the coal handling plant. The coal handling plant shown here is the receiving area for the coal coming from the mines. The capacity of storage is over 1 million tonne. The coal is stacked out by stackers automatically and is reclaimed for use in the power station as required by bucket reclaimers. The whole of the operation of this coal storage area is by remote control from the power station area, coal being brought by the reclaimer along the various conveyor belts that you see here, through the conveyor belts up into the building for use in the boiler. This is the 330 kV outdoor switch yard where all the power which is generated from the units is sent out into the state interconnected system.
Briefly, Mr. Jones, when will Liddell be producing its first power?
Well, number 2 unit, which is the first unit, is scheduled to be on firm commercial load in the winter of 1971.
And how does the Liddell project compare in size to the Vales Point and Munmora power stations in the Newcastle area?
Well, Vales Point power station is 875 megawatts, Munmora is 1400 megawatts, and Liddell, as I previously said, is 2000 megawatts.
And finally, Mr. Jones, how is progress to date?
The progress to date has been very satisfactory. The work in hand has been going quite well. If it continues to go as it is, and we expect it will, we anticipate that we'll meet the scheduled commissioning dates for the first unit and all subsequent units.
Look at the baby. Now listen. Tell Mummy it's a baby. Tell Mummy it's a baby. It's a nice baby. Where's your baby, Alison? Where's your baby? Is this your baby? That's a microphone. This is one of the problems.
Isn't that saying?
Alison's 2, and it's at this age that the education for the deaf's really got to begin. But the most difficult part, of course, is deciding, is a baby deaf? Mr. Lumbie, how did you find out that your daughter was deaf?
Well, we noticed that Alison was mouthing words, but not reproducing speech. And also she wasn't responding to sound as well as our first child, Kathy.
And what did you do about it?
Well, we asked our paediatrician to examine her hearing, and he referred us to the Commonwealth Acoustic Laboratory in Newcastle. And from there they assessed that Alison has a hearing loss which will require special education.
And how long has she had the hearing aid?
Since she was 16 months, which is 8 months.
And how long before she was able to say anything?
I think it took about 2 months before she was able to respond to a sound. And one of her first words was, as you heard then, baby, which she says quite well.
And where does Alison go from here?
Well, Alison is being educated at the Child Health Centre through Newcastle East Public School.
And Alison, have you got anything to say for us? When Alison comes down to the Child Health Centre for further treatment and education, this is the sort of scenes you'll find. This boy at 4 is quite old enough to make use of the specialised speech training unit.
What's your name?
Mitchell.
How old are you, Mitchell?
4.
Well, let's have a look at our book. What's this?
Hawk.
What's this?
Cat.
No, a rooster.
Rooster. Cow.
What's this?
Baby.
What's this?
Pig.
Let's count them, Mitchell.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Lovely. What's this?
Tell me, Miss Frost,
Yes.
how's young Mitchell doing?
Mitchell's doing extremely well. He's been coming to the Child Health Centre now for about a little over 2 years. He's progressed from 2 words when he first came, mum and car, to over 200 words in his expressive vocabulary and up to about 400 in his receptive language.
And what's this machine that you're using?
This is an Amplivox speech training unit. It amplifies sound, and of course it means that the sound goes directly into the child's ear, and he also has this boom microphone so that he's receiving his own voice back.
Well, what's the next step, and where does he go from here?
He'll go into an OD class, that's an opportunity deaf class, in a normal public school.
These children are deaf. You'd hardly know it. But here at Newcastle East School, they have the equipment and the teachers to encourage what residual hearing they have and to bring them along to the stage where they can even sing. Here, for instance, is a young 5-year-old learning to read from the board words which otherwise he would never hear from for himself without special assistance. The more senior pupils at Newcastle East here even go in for producing their own plays. Miss Brost is the teacher. Tell me, Miss Brost, what's the object of this?
This is a portion of a play, The Queen of Hearts, these children are doing. The main aim is to encourage spontaneous expression and also encourage clear diction.
Done! Jack, did you see all those hats? No, Mother. Stop! What is this? Go get the doctor. I don't want the doctor. person if he had no any germs. Why not? Because it will make the germs spread up like a bit and go bang. Oh! Take the button away. I have a lot of germs. I took the cat. Oh!
There's living proof that taking adequate care of deaf children is a very worthwhile effort. Sitting with me is Mrs. Elizabeth Burgess, born deaf, and who suffered through an early deaf childhood, but now appears to be suffering no handicap at all. Mrs. Burgess, when did your parents find out that you were deaf?
When I was about 2, my parents discovered that I became deaf. My mother had rebelled, then me into my treatment.
And when did you learn to make sounds for yourself by lip reading? You were about 4?
Yes, that's right. That's when the first break, what they described as the first breakthrough came. My mother was thrilled, I believe.
You must have been thrilled. Did you suffer at all at school because you were deaf?
No, not at all. I'm pretty lucky, I think. Everyone was always good and kind to me. The only nastiness I've ever struck was from one kid, and it was always nasty to the other people. Anyway, then, okay.
And there are obviously no handicaps now. You're obviously happily married with a beautiful little girl.
Yes, that's right.
Did you go to a deaf school at all, or what sort of special training did you have?
I did not attend a deaf school. I attended a deaf kindergarten at Piedmont when I was about 3 to 4 years old, but that was part-time at the same time as the kindergarten, normal kindergarten. And when I went to the normal primary school, I did have free training an hour a week. But apart from that, no real special training by professional people. My mother did all the training, and that's for a fact.
Well, there's a lot more help available these days. Do you wear a hearing aid?
Oh, yes. Oh, we wear a hearing aid.
You wear a hearing aid all the time now?
Yes.
How do you manage speaking on the telephone and this sort of thing?
By intelligent get work. But actually, at the telephone, I get out with converse with people that I am familiar with. And I anticipate what they like us to talk about. But if they get onto the new subject, I'm just a little bit lost sometimes, but they have to spell it out to me.
Well, otherwise you're living a